Have you ever thought that not everything that exists was created by God? It sounds strange, but there are creatures that fall outside of God's divine plan. Few people explore this topic, but it can completely change the way you see the world. If you want to know what the Bible says about these beings and their purposes, get ready, because this discovery might surprise you. The story of the Nephilim is something few know in depth, but it's right there, at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4. The Nephilim, giants who roamed the earth, were the result of the union between fallen angels and human women. Just imagine, a deliberate attempt to corrupt human lineage, diverting God's plan for humanity. And this isn't just an ancient legend. There are lessons here that apply to our lives today. Think about the temptations and corruptions that try to steer us away from our goals and greater purpose. The Nephilim were beings of immense physical power, but they were not blessed with God's grace. They existed in a pre-flood world where evil had spread so far that God had to intervene drastically. It's interesting to note how these giant beings still symbolize, even today, the forces that attempt to distort our nature. It's not unlike the social pressures and external influences we face daily. What choices are we making to protect our own spiritual lineage? For many, the Nephilim remain an intriguing mystery, but what few realize is how they represent the corruption that arises when we stray from core principles. Think about the decisions you make today. Are you allowing something giant to interfere with your values and beliefs? Just like in the time of the Nephilim, humanity has always been at the mercy of these influences, whether physical or spiritual. No wonder discipline and focus are essential for anyone seeking to live with purpose. And it's not just about understanding the past. These giants and the corruption they brought are a reminder that God was preparing the stage for something much bigger. The flood would come as a reset, but before that, the world needed to witness the magnitude of the distortion. This is where the story begins to intertwine with something far greater: God's plan to preserve the lineage of the promise, which leads us to the next chapter of this fascinating narrative. The flood was God's direct response to the chaos that had taken over the earth. The world had become so corrupted that there was no turning back. This is where Noah comes into the picture, the only righteous man in a lost generation. God's choice to spare only Noah's family wasn't random. It was a measure to ensure the preservation of a pure and faithful lineage, through which the Messiah would come. This event shows us how God acts firmly when justice must prevail. Imagine the world being restarted from scratch. This was God's opportunity to cleanse the genetic corruption caused by the Nephilim and the fallen angels. The flood was more than just a storm. It was a complete reset of humanity, a turning point. Today, we can draw parallels to situations where we feel our lives need a spiritual reset. Sometimes, a radical cleansing is necessary to make room for the new and for what truly matters. Noah's story also reveals how, even in the midst of chaos, God always keeps a promise. He made a covenant with Noah, a pact of restoration and hope. And what do we learn from this? That regardless of what happens around us, if we maintain our faith and obedience, there's always a new chance waiting for us. No matter how corrupt the world around us may seem, God never forgets those who walk with Him. This powerful account of the flood isn't just about destruction, but about renewal. God knew that the plan of salvation could not be compromised by a corrupt lineage. By eliminating the threat of the Nephilim, He ensured that the path to the Messiah remained intact. But this story doesn't end here. In fact, it merely sets the stage for one of the greatest falls heaven ever witnessed. Before his fall, Lucifer was one of the most glorious beings in heaven. His beauty, wisdom, and high rank made him a figure of great importance among the angels. But something changed. Pride began to fill his heart, and he believed he could be like God himself. This fatal error was the beginning of his rebellion, the moment when Lucifer, a radiant angel, transformed into God's ultimate enemy, Satan. It makes us reflect on how pride can corrupt even the most blessed individuals. Lucifer's fall wasn't just a celestial matter, but an event with cosmic repercussions. He didn't fall alone. He dragged with him a legion of angels who joined his cause. It's curious to think how pride doesn't just affect the one who harbors it, but spreads and influences others around them. In our reality, we see this in leaders who, blinded by vanity, lead others down destructive paths. Lucifer teaches us that pride can divert us from our purpose, even when we are at the top. But don't think Lucifer's fall was quick or without consequences. He fought to maintain his position, and this culminated in a war in heaven, where he and his followers were defeated and cast out. Imagine the impact of this event. Lucifer, who once held such an exalted position, now found himself forever separated from God. In life, many of us experience falls that seem impossible to overcome, but there's always a choice between humility and pride. Lucifer chose rebellion, and the result was catastrophic. Even with his expulsion, Lucifer's story doesn't end there. He didn't give up on his goal, and his fall only fueled his desire for revenge against God and his creation. The fall was just the beginning of a much larger strategy that he would develop, one that would impact Earth and humanity. Thus, Lucifer's plan unfolded with a new mission: to corrupt everything good that God had created. Want to dive deeper into biblical themes like this? Check out our exclusive ebook in the comments. It offers detailed analysis and spiritual reflections that complement this video. Don't miss it. Download your copy now. Before his fall, Lucifer wasn't just any angel. He held an extremely important position in heaven, leading worship and praise to God. His role as the leader of the heavenly choir placed him in a privileged position, surrounded by harmony and beauty. Imagine the responsibility of inspiring and guiding the other angels in worshiping the Creator. But this prominent position eventually fed Lucifer's pride, leading him to believe he deserved more than he already had. Lucifer's power of influence over the other angels was remarkable. He used this influence negatively, convincing a portion of the angels to join his rebellion. This makes us think about how power and influence can be powerful tools, both for good and for evil. It's like in life, where charismatic leaders can inspire for good or manipulate for personal gain. Lucifer chose the path of manipulation, using his position to incite disobedience. Music, which was one of the main elements of worship in heaven, was also part of Lucifer's identity. Through music, he had the power to touch the hearts of angels, creating a deep connection with the divine. However, he distorted this gift to serve his own interests. Think about how music, even today, has the power to influence us, either lifting us spiritually or leading us down dangerous paths. Just as Lucifer used music to lead the rebellion, it continues to be a tool of power in today's world. Lucifer lost his place of honor, but his desire to lead and be adored didn't disappear. He took this desire with him when he was cast out of heaven, and his mission became to subvert God's plan on earth. This shift in scenery shows us that, although he lost his heavenly position, his quest for power and influence didn't end there. On the contrary, he now sought to exert his influence on a new stage, the human world, where he would begin his strategy against God's creation. After his fall, Lucifer, now Satan, did not give up on his plans for destruction. On the contrary, he found a new strategy: to corrupt humanity, the creation that God deeply loved. His goal wasn't just to ruin God's plan, but also to lead humans into a rebellion similar to his own. Satan knew that by distorting the hearts and minds of people, he could create a world of chaos and distance from God. This strategic plan was carefully and coldly calculated. However, Satan doesn't act in a direct and obvious way. He prefers subtlety, ensnaring people in their own wills and desires. Think about how he manipulates our weaknesses. It's not brute force but small temptations, doubts, and fears that slowly lead us off our path. It's like in life, when you find yourself gradually drifting away from a larger goal without even realizing it. Satan operates in the small concessions we make, chipping away at our convictions bit by bit. One of his greatest tricks is his ability to disguise evil as something attractive and desirable. He creates illusions and lies, making wrong seem right and sin appear pleasurable. Today, we see this reflected in society in countless ways. What was once unquestionable is now debated, and what was considered wrong is viewed as normal. This inversion of values is part of Satan's plan, which seeks to twist what God has made good into something distorted and confusing. But this strategy of corruption is not limited to individual humanity. Satan also infiltrates social structures, power systems, culture, and even religions. He uses these influences to create division, wars, and despair. And even when we can identify his traps, his persistence is relentless. Yet, every move Satan makes against humanity is, at the same time, part of a larger narrative that will ultimately lead him to face divine justice. The crucial moment when Satan, in the form of a serpent, deceived Eve in the Garden of Eden marks the beginning of one of humanity's greatest tragedies. He approached Eve with cunning, asking questions and placing doubts in her mind about God's intentions. Satan didn't force Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. He planted the seed of doubt, causing her to question what God had said. This shows us how subtle doubts can creep into our lives and lead us to decisions that, at first glance, seem harmless. The serpent didn't choose just any argument to deceive Eve. It touched on the most delicate point, the desire to be like God. And who hasn't ever desired to be more than they are, or to reach something seemingly out of reach? The story of Eve teaches us that what may seem like a small transgression can have enormous consequences. In our lives, we might be tempted to believe that certain, small concessions are harmless, but they can pave the way for much greater consequences. When Eve ate the fruit and then offered it to Adam, sin entered the world. But the act of disobedience didn't begin there. It started in the mind, with the question, did God really say that? Satan knew that by twisting God's words, he could create a breach in Eve's trust in the Creator. How many times do we find ourselves in the same situation, questioning if what we know to be right is truly the best path? The serpent used this strategy to deceive, and it remains highly effective today. The deception of the serpent in Eden was only Satan's first move on earth, but the consequences of that act still echo today. Humanity found itself separated from God because of this sin, but the story doesn't end there. In fact, what happened in Eden paved the way for a long spiritual conflict between good and evil that was just beginning to unfold. And this battle continues today, affecting each of us in ways we may not always notice. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden, the impact was devastating and spread throughout all creation. Sin, which had been non-existent until then, became part of the human experience. Death, which wasn't part of the original plan, became an inevitable reality. Separation from God was not just physical but spiritual. The intimate and pure relationship that man had with God was broken. This shows us how a single wrong choice can bring consequences that go far beyond the moment. Adam and Eve's disobedience didn't just bring death, it also ushered in a world of suffering, pain, and struggle. Life, which had been harmonious, became marked by hard labor, pain, and conflict. What do we learn from this? That the choices we make today can shape our future in unpredictable ways. Often, we don't realize the consequences of our actions until it's too late. This serves as a reminder of how we need to be mindful of our decisions and the influence they have on our lives. And it wasn't just that. The separation from God created a deep void that humanity has been trying to fill ever since. Sin built a barrier that prevents people from experiencing the fullness that comes from a relationship with God. The relentless search for meaning, purpose, and satisfaction that we see in the world today is a direct reflection of this separation. People try to fill this void with temporary things, but true fulfillment can only come from reconciliation with the Creator. The impact of sin wasn't limited to Adam and Eve. All of humanity inherited the consequences of their choice, a legacy we still carry today. But the story doesn't end here. Despite the chaos caused by sin, God had a plan to restore what had been lost. This is the bridge to something much greater that was to come, the promise of redemption, and how Satan would continue to use his tactics to divert humanity from this path. From the beginning, Lucifer, before his fall, played a significant role in heaven related to music. He used this gift to glorify God, but after his fall, he distorted the purpose of music, turning it into a tool to manipulate and lead people away from God. The influence of music is powerful, and Satan knows it. How often are we drawn to a melody or lyric that, instead of lifting us spiritually, leads us to feelings of sadness, anger, or even rebellion? Music is a double-edged sword, and Satan knows how to wield it well. Today, we see the impact of music in all areas of society. It can uplift the soul, inspire acts of love and faith, but it can also poison hearts and minds with messages that glorify selfishness, violence, or immorality. Think about how certain songs seem to dominate our minds and emotions. This is one of Satan's most subtle strategies. He understands that music directly touches our hearts, and through it, he can shape our attitudes and beliefs without us even realizing it. But not all is lost. Music also has the power to reconnect us with God, to restore our inner peace, and to remind us of spiritual truths. That's why it's essential that we wisely choose what we listen to. If Lucifer used music to promote his rebellion, we can use it to promote our devotion. Choosing music that inspires us to worship, reflect, and grow spiritually is a practical way to protect ourselves from the negative influences Satan tries to exert. Satan continues to influence the world through music, but that doesn't mean we should turn away from this divine gift. On the contrary, we can use music as a powerful spiritual weapon against his schemes. By filling our minds and hearts with melodies and lyrics that honor God, we create an environment where the enemy cannot penetrate. This leads us to realize that the battle for the human soul happens in many ways, including through the sounds that surround us. After all that you've learned, the big question now is, how does this impact your life? Are you ready to apply this knowledge and transform your perspective of the world around you? Understanding these creatures and what they represent makes us question our reality and the choices we make every day. So, what will you do with this newfound understanding? Are you ready to adjust your life according to these revelations? If you're seeking more knowledge like this, don't waste any time. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and keep learning about the mysteries surrounding our existence. There's so much more to come that will help you better understand God's divine plans and how to live in alignment with them.